Hello, everyone. I'm Mr. E,
And I'm Mortimer the Authenticator, and we are the Duality of Man.
and today we're talking about involuntary celibacy or incels. And I'm pretty sure just saying that we are now flagged on YouTube.
Yes, we are speaking neutral to positively about the forbidden ones, ergo into the oubliette of digital existence with you.
Now, let's talk about what an incel is. It's just a guy who, for whatever reason, can't seem to be able to meet women and hook up with them. Literally, that's it.
Well, see,
There's
I don't
no.
see. I'm not sure I would even go so far as to say it's that simple. Fuck all the moralistic woo-woo scaremongering bullshit, but I would argue that to be an incel, you kind of have to be suffering from the long-term effects of loneliness because they've actually done studies on the long-term effects of social isolation or loneliness, and it's staggering how similar the psychological profiles of the average incel, like confirmed identifies as an incel, not the everyone I don't like is an incel or the new word for nerd incel. I mean, in terms of like medically, if incel is to mean a thing that is actually substantive, I think what you have in inceldom is basically what happens to a human brain that doesn't um, experience the phenomena of touch in an intimate or social proofing kind of way. It kind of reminds me actually a little bit of Harlow's monkeys, if anyone is familiar with that experiment. They gave two infant monkeys two surrogate mothers. One mother that was designed to be terrifying to them and was made of a bunch of sharp metal, but that had a feeding tube that would actually feed them. And one mother that was nurturing and soft and pleasant to the young monkeys, but didn't have a feeding tube. The two monkeys starved to death because they spent all their time with the nurturing mother and didn't even mess around usually with the feeding tube mother because it was so terrifying to them. I think what we see in inceldom is basically um, what happens when a human goes too long without any sort of positive social contact.
I disagree to an extent because I don't think that you need to necessarily be in a situation that bad in order to be considered an incel. Though I will agree that being an incel for an extended period of time will cause you to degenerate into um, a state of severe loneliness.
The thing is, I think it's a mistake to call being in an incel a choice, and that's why I tie in kind of the medical side of it because the
Well, I wouldn't say it's a choice because there there's no choice in it for them. Their choice would be to find somebody to have sex with.
yeah, the word involuntary is in the term incel for a reason, i.e., it's basically what happens when a person tries everything they can to gain social proof or intimacy of the fairer sex and basically bottoms out of the dominance hierarchy. It's not even a beta male or an omega male or a sigma male or whatever. It's you have failed to meet the basic requirements to even be qualified as part of the dominance hierarchy. Is basically what an incel is. That doesn't mean there aren't people who are incelish who could solve the issue with the appropriate um, actions, but very often that's kind of the straw man tradcon advice that they get is, well, if you could just go to the gym or if you could just X, Y, and Z, you wouldn't be an incel anymore. And it's like, a lot of them, and by that I mean the vast majority of them, have tried all of the PUA slash tradcon maneuvers, and it still hasn't netted them jack shit. And B, there are certain people who are medically incapable of engaging with that, i.e., people with mental and physical disabilities, people with social abnormalities, people with deformities, etc. No matter how much of a PUA you are, there are certain states of being that are just never going to net you anything but incel them, unfortunately.
While I would advise self improvement, I would not advise it in order to get sex. You should do it like for your own benefit, and also because it will almost certainly help to improve your state of mind.
Yeah, for its own sake is also something I want to throw in here because again, I know I harp on this point far too often, maybe, but gone apparently are the days where we just do things for their own sake, and I think that's a mistake on
Yeah, I mean, I agree.
civilization at wider's
If
part.
if you can make yourself better, what reason do you have not to?
Yeah,
But yeah. So these guys, they for whatever reason are incapable of finding somebody to have sex with. Many of them have tried everything that we are told is supposed to work, and I think that's why a lot of them get severely frustrated because everyone they talk to, all the advice they get, like society tells them, this is what will get you
just
a
be
partner.
yourself. Be as empathetic and emotional as you can. Be sensitive and there for them, and always be supportive and yada yada yada. It's
And the thing
basic,
is, a lot of these guys aren't necessarily just looking, to hook up or just for sex. A lot of these guys would like a real relationship, but
meaningful relationship, but a meaningful relationship simply is not on the cards for them apparently
yeah,
because fe- because female hypergamy is a son of a bitch. Um, and that's the other thing, and the other reason why I don't like the whole why don't you just go to the gym and get swole and everything, and that'll make everything better. I don't like the notion that you should have to change everything about yourself in order to be a worthwhile human being. Because we never ever say anything of the kind to women. We never say you have to meet certain requirements in order to be considered a valid woman or a woman worth empathetic consideration. We extend
I
empathy to women in general
I would
just
disagree to that
gratis.
at a cer- at a certain level. There I have started to see a change because I've started to see men exercise standards, not necessarily standards for women who they're trying to sleep with, but definitely standards for women who they are trying to interested in marrying. Like
Yeah,
men are
self
beginning to have more and more standards
basically
for who
exhibiting
they will marry.
self-respect.
Yeah, and
And
like
go
for
ahead.
men, the challenge is obtaining sex because obviously the woman decides who and who not she sleeps with. But I think for women, like it's who is willing to marry you is their challenge.
Yeah, it's I doubt we're even close to the first people to bring this up, but um the thing with the sexual revolution is it maximizes women's innate evolutionary power to gatekeep sex, but it also inadvertently maximizes the power of men to gatekeep long-term relationships. And that's the thing that pisses the feminists off because they thought that if they were the ones who gatekeep sex, they would be the ones who gatekeep the long-term relationship. And for a while, that was how it worked until the various red pills started circulating, and then it was like, oh well, you know, I decide whether this is a long-term relationship or not, and therefore, um, on the men's part. But the um, women don't very often, both the extremely gynocentric women and feminist women understand, don't like that, and they find it oppressive. They think that if I open my legs for you, I'm sorry for being crude, but if I open my legs for you, then you should be wrapped around my little finger and do everything that I want. That's why you see things like female dating strategies that treat the dating marketplace like product shopping, or like comparative shopping, like Best Buy or Craigslist or something like that. They're looking female. The difference between PUAs and female dating strategies, and I think we've touched on this before, is PUAs acknowledge that they are the product and the salesman, and therefore they're engaging in salesmanship tactics to try and get women to buy their product. But female dating strategies is different because they don't consider it to be their job to sell themselves to men. They consider that men are the product, and that therefore the highest responsibility that they have is to be a smart shopper. That's also why they hate PUAs, because PUAs use basic bitch salesmanship tactics, in their minds probably on par with a sleazy used car salesman, kind of like Danny DeVito's character from Matilda. And that's why feminist, gynocentric women and female dating strategies users hate PUAs, because they view what PUAs do as sleazy salesmen trying to trick them into buying a subpar product. So they engage in female dating strategies to basically act as the Better Business Bureau for relationships, or for sex.
Yeah, and I think now that men have, I think really, well, I think some men have started to catch on, and it is spreading farther and wider. But the reason why I want to talk about the incels is because our society is dumping on them and shitting on them for reasons that are entirely undeserved. Like these guys, for the there have been some incels who have done some things that are terrible, and that's absolutely terrible. Those people should be
Mm-hmm.
widely condemned. But I say those people, not the people who happen to also be involuntary celibates that have done nothing wrong. But our society seems to just be shitting on them as a group.
Well,
As
there's that, and there's the other detail of the fact that those incels that have done things wrong haven't usually done them in the name of inceldom. Inceldom isn't an ideology or a philosophical position for them. And that's another aspect of the way that incels get treated that is erroneous. The idea that inceldom is a worldview or a philosophy or an ideology instead of a set of circumstances or a state of affairs is just massively erroneous.
yeah, inceldom is basically the male equivalent of the cat lady who never got married.
Well, that, and I would argue that in a weird way, incels and MGTOWs are kind of two sides of the same coin. Um, MGTOWs um are incels who own their shit and do so consciously. Or I guess you could say that incels are men forced their own way. MGTOW is voluntary and conscious. Incel is a passive default
I
of
wouldn't
the same
say
thing.
they're forced their own way because they haven't walked away. I think they're still beating their heads against the wall trying to figure out things.
Some of them are. There are some though who are just like, yeah, no, this is my lot in life. It sucks, but it is my lot in life. I mean that's kind of where the idea of the Chad and Stacy, or I forget what the black version of the Stacy is. I know the black version of the Chad is the Tyrone, but yeah, that's where those kind of terms come from, is when incels kind of commiserate each other by pointing out essentially the way the dominance hierarchy game is rigged and fucked beyond all reason, which it is.
Yeah. And, you know, these poor guys, they're only like this because they bought into the falsehood that society tells people. I'm not going to say lie because, like you mentioned the conversation we had before, I'm sure some of these people actually believe what they're saying, but it
A
is a
lie
falsehood.
implies the active attempt to deceive. A falsehood is simply something you can be mistaken on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is absolutely a falsehood. And the thing is, when you try to acknowledge that it is a falsehood, they shut you down because society wants
Yeah.
to be perceived in a certain way.
It's all ultimately about the abstraction of validity. Now, there's a difference between substance and validity in this particular um, system that I'm devising. All of these ideologies, be they social justice, intersectional feminism, be they um, the various kinds of socialism and communism, they're all more, the worship of science as though it's some sort of deity. It's all concerned with validity over substance, i.e., you need to be valid in the abstract first, and if you're valid in the abstract first, then you can do no wrong. But if you're not valid in the abstract first, then it doesn't matter how substantive or correct you are, you're just invalid, and therefore you're inadmissible to the discussion or the system or the hierarchy or however you want to put it. And that's what happens with incels. These are the men who have been deemed to be invalid in the abstract, and therefore, since they're invalid in the abstract, it's okay to conflate them with all of these negative, nefarious, and malicious things. Because only an invalid person would believe malicious things, never mind all the active Machiavellianism that goes on in these power hierarchies between the aristocrats, but never to mind that. Um,
Yeah. And a lot of these guys, it's not that they don't go on like bad dates and just don't make a connection. A lot of these guys don't even get seen. They don't get like noticed at all. Like they're basically relegated to the status of a non-player character. They are
yeah,
useful for the purpose of the job that they perform and nothing else.
I think I talked about this theory or this classification I have in our Men in the Manosphere show. The phenomena of the real men or valid men versus the blank human, the blank male human. I think that's part of what's going on. Is as I explained uh um in that stream, they feminist and extremely gynocentric women both actually don't see. Oh shit, my phone is dying.
Well, having some technical difficulties. Hopefully Dalton can join us again. But as we were saying, yeah, women they see these guys like as a cashier or as a mechanic or a plumber. They only see them in the context of their usefulness to them and society and the job that they perform. But they don't consider that person as, hey, that's a man who maybe I could date, or maybe that guy would make a good boyfriend or husband. And, it's in women's nature to, consider things like resources, so like money, jobs, and also things like status. But, you know, you see a lot of these women, they'll go on social media like Twitter, Instagram, uh, TikTok, Chinese spyware app, and they will complain about how there's no good men. Because that's because the guys you're chasing are assholes. Like there are plenty of guys out there. If you're not trying to get naked men, that's because you are not choosing them. They are not the one who tick your boxes, and it's up to them to really figure out why that is. So Dylan's back. Let me add him to the stream.
Yeah, sorry, my
You're
phone
alive.
died. My phone cord is getting frayed and it's getting harder to charge my phone. So if that happens again, it's just because my phone died. Anyway, I was talking about the phenomena of the blank human and as it relates to the concept of real men. I think what it is ultimately, and the reason why feminist equality is so beyond fucked, is because they actually only consider the men who are at the top of the 80-20 rule, the alpha chads, the quote unquote real men, the high achievers, to actually be real men. And so anyone that doesn't fit the 80-20 rule actually in the abstract isn't a man. They're just a blank male warm body to be useful or to be vilified, but not to be considered for the broader calculations of empathy or empathy or relationships or romance or any of that. I think that's ultimately where incels find themselves, is they are the perfect example of the male humans who aren't considered valid men and therefore aren't men and therefore are just blank.
I think another thing that we should consider is a lot of these guys might be involuntary celibates because they are socially awkward or don't know how to say things. And I think part of the problem about that is that in modern society, women have made social interactions far more dangerous and hazardous. Like you don't like you try to talk to women like maybe you're a little bit awkward, maybe you don't necessarily say with first. Like
Maybe
you could get called a
you're on
creep.
the spectrum or on some other mental disorder spectrum.
Yeah, you could go to creep. You could get say that you're harassing her, or like she'll say blow you off like I have a boyfriend, walk away, bye, even if you didn't have a boyfriend. Or like if you work, like she could complain, get you called into HR. Like it's a
It's
really hazardous environment out there, and really the only thing that separates harassment from flirting is whether or not the woman likes you, which you
yeah.
won't know unless you actually try to talk to her.
Yeah, I'm gonna borrow a piece of I'm gonna borrow a scenario from Dr. Random Cam. I forget which video he said it on, but I know it was him who I heard say it. Uh, a inner city black kid on a bike walks by a beautiful woman and says, Hello, dear. I really like what you've got going on there." She freaks out, hisses at him for catcalling, and he is taken away by either the mob or the police, whichever one she calls first. Rich, 6 foot plus banker in a limousine walks by on the same street to the same woman, possibly even on the same day, says, "Hello, darling, I really like what you've got going on there." She swoons, gets in the limousine, and then proceeds to gold dig him into a financial hole for the remaining 20 or so years of his life. The only difference here is very much a class and aesthetic and clout difference. And that's the ultimate funny thing here. Because for all of the insinuations about the capitalist patriarchy and how classism is just an affectation of male dominant hierarchies and so on and so on and so forth. For all of that shite, the instinctive gynocentrism of women that makes them favor the high achievers over anyone else will always wind them up in this implicit classism, because one of the vectors of what makes someone an incel can be, and very often is, a grooming issue. And the thing with grooming issues is grooming takes resources, and resources very often takes money and or influence. So if you're a poor inner city kid who can't afford to polish himself up nice and neat to proposition a woman, then you basically automatically are out of the running, my friend.
Yeah, like you need money in order to present the best version of yourself. Like not
Now,
even just
some of that can be equalized by being clever and or um, planning ahead. I'm not particularly uber wealthy, but I regularly wear bow ties and my top hat, of course. Um, but that also requires time and energy and intellectual space to figure that kind of shit out. And the thing with people in poorer communities, especially, is they don't have the time and mental space to figure this shit out because they've got other shit to do. Rent is due on the first, and there needs to be food on the table, etc.
yeah. And another thing that I want to mention is that the guys that they're chasing, um, they they want them to be uh, committed to them. They want to be they want to try and lock down the guy with the most resource. But the problem is because said guy has the most resources, he doesn't have to.
Yeah, they want someone like Lex Luthor to have the moral compass of somebody like Steve Rogers, and that's just and I apologize for the universe crossing level of nerddom there, but that's essentially what they want. They want the alpha Chad with the six or seven sixes um, to behave like the shy, poor kid who's very, sensitive and in touch with his feelings. And the problem is, in order to be a high achiever, very often, especially because there are other people who are narcissistic or have cluster B personality disorders, you often have to have the kind of ambition that only narcissism or other cluster B personality disorders can buy you. And if you have narcissism in cluster B, um, there's very little chance for you to have things like empathy or sensitivity, which means you can't be the archetypical desirable male feminist. But that's the catch 22 of feminist theory, because because feminists and gynocentric women only see the high achievers as the valid men, but they also see the negativity of those valid men as something shared by all men, and therefore the only solution is to feminize the shit out of those alpha men until they um, internally resemble the Steve Rogers type character, but still somehow manage to maintain the Lex Luthor or Supermanish lifestyle.
Yeah, and you mentioned the sexual revolution. I want to mention that before the sexual revolution, when sex wasn't given out as freely, like if a guy had sex with a woman who was usually a virgin that first time, it was either because they had just gotten married, or if they weren't married, he was going to marry her,
Yeah, they were
usually
courting.
by force, by societal enforcement.
Yeah, and it became extremely awkward for certain people because certain people could get women to have sex with them, but they also weren't the socially approved men. This particularly affected people in minority statuses like black men and gay men or bisexual men. And therefore, it was assumed by default that if a rich, white, aristocratic woman was found in bed or was found to have had sex with a young black kid, he obviously raped her no matter how consensual he can demonstrate it is, because no rich white woman would ever sully her virtue and honor by stooping a black kid, even if she initiated it. Hence, lynching.
Yeah, and I think that societal enforcement of monogamy, I think that was beneficial to both sexes, where the woman was guaranteed the protection and resources of the guy through marriage, whereas the man was guaranteed a woman to be his wife and have children with.
I still maintain the biggest problem with the sexual revolution is that it was incomplete, that it only affected half of the people. Because I genuinely think that if the sexual revolution had occurred for both genders, instead of just one, i.e., the women, if the sexual revolution had occurred for both genders, we could have we could have found a straight up new paradigm that would have worked just as well and had much more latitude and freedom for all involved. Unfortunately, because we are still a very gynocentric species and prioritize the um, the privileges of women over the validity of men, the sexual revolution only really happened for one gender, leaving the other gender to be in an even harder position to pick up the slack because women were all but freed of their part in the marriage contract, but men were not freed by any extent of theirs. And that essentially made the duties of the man even more extensive and harder to fulfill. Because if the women are having their cake and eating it too, to keep within the metaphor, someone has to be held responsible for baking twice as many cakes. And wouldn't you go ahead and know it, the job of baking the cake usually falls to the sex that are forced to engage in labor, namely men.
Yeah, but there's something that occurred to me recently, and you know how our society is just constantly crapping all over the incel community. I thought to myself, why are you doing this to them? I mean, they already have a hard enough time where they can't find people to have sex with or be in a meaningful relationship with. Why are you additionally crapping on them? And I think it's just because there's a group of people out there who can only make themselves feel better about their own lives by crapping on people they consider to be lower than themselves.
Well, yes, there's definitely that, but there's also the fact of we very often, and this isn't right necessarily, but it is how things work. We very often associate qualitative value with moral value, i.e., it's very hard for us to remind ourselves that someone who is outwardly beautiful and competent and meritocratic might not be the most moral person. And since we associate moral quality and qualitative quality, well, someone who is lacking in qualitative quality also must be lacking in moral quality. Derp. And therefore, the the socially invalid men are also the morally invalid men because we say so because it makes sense in the abstract, according to our framework.
Yeah, that reminds me of years and years ago. This mugshot of this guy was circulating, and women were fawning all over him because he was handsome. Never mind the fact that the guy was a criminal. Women were like,
That just gives him dark, edgy cachet, don't you know?
yeah, women were going crazy for this guy. And like, you don't know anything about him other than you think he's attractive and that he's a criminal. Like, you would think one would negate the other, but apparently women are willing to overlook the fact that a guy is going to jail if he is good looking enough.
Okay, but here's the other half of that. The reason why criminal enterprise isn't automatically a non-starter is because criminal enterprises are are at the very least a lot of the time very difficult to pull off, and therefore there's a competence and a meritocracy to criminality. And as we know, very often, especially in the past, the high ranking criminal masterminds had wealth and power and clout out the wazoo. And if wealth and power and clout are what you look for in an instinctive metric, then a criminal mastermind with a six-figure income and a nice suit isn't all that dissimilar from a magnate or a robber baron with a nice suit and with the aforementioned sixes. That's what. That's why I think it is. It goes back to the archetypes. The two most attractive archetypes of men for women are the beast male and the noble male. The beast male has overt physical dominance and power. The noble male has the more abstract signifiers of status and or manners. Um, and the gangster in particular, the mobster, the gangster, um, is very attractive to a certain percentage of women because in some ways the gangster has aspects of both. He has the dangerous animalistic charm of I can bully whoever I want. That's the beast male. And he also very often has the signifiers of wealth and refinement, aka the nice suit, the Armani watches, the limousines, etc. So that's why criminals aren't necessarily a non-starter for women. They have power in an animalistic sense and often some signifiers of status.
Yeah, but
So
it yeah, but all of that is undercut with the constant threat of violence. There was I believe a rapper. He was out on a date with a girl, and she was tweeting about what they were doing on Instagram. Somebody came into the restaurant they were at, shot and killed him. Yeah,
yeah, but the problem is the threat of violence isn't necessarily a non-starter either. I mean, look at the popularity of things like Twilight, 50 Shades of Grey, or bodice ripper novels. The idea of a man powerful enough to take what he wants is very attractive for women, especially because there's also the potential of I can be the beauty that tames the beast. The problem is because they have this intuitive way of compartmentalizing, he's dangerous in an attractive way and he's dangerous in a non attractive way, because they can compartmentalize those two things. They get blindsided when the violence comes home to roost and they are affected by it.
the
So
thing
much
is, I
so
think
that they actually get more offended by the idea that the violence affected them in the end than they would if the guy was just nonviolent at all and then turned out to be violent.
I think those stories have a sort of controlled, almost sensual level of violence internally between the couple, whereas the violence that was demonstrated in my story was like uncontrolled external violence that just ends in death.
Well, I would say it's more about cognitive dissonance. They like the idea that a person can their potential mate can do violence against other people or even perhaps do violence on her behalf. They don't like the idea that that violence would therefore affect them. But they also believe, by virtue of women's moral purity and or sexual purity, that they are sacred enough that the violence shouldn't have to splash onto them. And that's why when it does, they get they get almost exponentially offended. I
Yeah,
I knew he was dangerous, but I assumed that danger would extend to other people or people I wanted him to target. I didn't think it would affect me. How dare he
yeah,
let it affect me? I'm a woman, don't you know?
do they think these things exist in a vacuum? Like when you are with a
Essentially,
man
yes.
who, when women are with a man who is violent, that creates enemies. People are aggrieved. Those grievances just don't go away. They will be redressed somehow, either by law or by the sword.
Or by less than legal means, yes. But the thing is, and this also might go back to evolutionary psychology again, if a woman can convince the next warlord that she's worth keeping around, then she gets to stoop all the most powerful men. And if she can be Machiavellian and manipulative enough, if she can pull a Lady Macbeth, then she gets to stay at the top of the hierarchy and rotate out the men, which is good for her evolutionarily because that means she gets to diversify who gets her seed or who fertilizes her egg, rather.
Yeah, but that's another thing. Most men would not be interested in taking care of another man's children, especially nowadays. Like a couple generations ago, like it might not have been that bad dating someone who already had kids because that the relationship probably
She,
dissolved
she's a
because of something.
widower. They divorced because he was abusive to her, etc., or
Yeah,
something like that.
they didn't just like split up for no reason.
Well,
And
I just kind of want to have the relationship over. So next, yeah,
yeah, whereas now, like it could have been like, you know, they hooked up, they had a kid, but like she's not someone that the guy would ever seriously consider being with. It was just a hookup that resulted in a kid. And a lot of guys thinking nowadays is, "We had a kid with this guy, and he didn't want to be with you. Why on earth should I?"
yeah. What went wrong that I need to be watching out for? Am I about to violate the golden rule and stick my dick in crazy?
Yeah, and a lot of women nowadays are finding themselves with kids, but unable to, you know, find a meaningful relationship or somebody to be a father figure for those children because men don't want to give the resources and the thing they work for somebody else's kid when the person that fathered that child doesn't even want anything to do with them.
It's also funny because due to a lot of women's hypergamous standards, especially when bolstered by feminism, um, they are increasingly unlikely to quote unquote settle, and therefore while away all their fertile years, um, not having children. And then when they hit 40 or 50, they begin to wonder, what did I do wrong? Where are all the good men? Never mind that in the process of her life, she ignored all the non real men or the invalid men or the incels. And now she finds it a burden on her that she has to settle in her old age for the incels that she used to consider invalid. And that's the funny thing. If all the if all the late bloomer women, we'll call it, if all the late bloomer women who while away most of their fertile years, um, waiting for the Giga Chad, in their old age or their middle age at least, settled for an incel, these two groups could basically annihilate each other because they're relatively equivalent in terms of the numbers. The problem is um, even the most spinstery of the old age women now don't don't want to lower themselves to an incel, and so what's going to happen instead, evolutionarily speaking, is both um the uppity spinster women and the incels are going to end up being deselected out of the gene pool,
Yeah,
and the population is going to go down accordingly.
and one thing, like a lot of these guys, maybe they do have the potential to be great men. Like,
Yeah,
well, if you,
they got
to
passed
an
over for superficial reasons a lot of the
yeah,
time.
the thing is, a lot of guys like are pretty simple to please. Like, if we only have to take care of ourselves, then we'll take care of ourselves and be content. But like a lot of guys, if they have something that they care about, that they consider of greater value to themselves, that's when all their potential really gets
Yeah,
pulled out.
yeah,
Like
and
I've
that
seen guys
that's
talk
the
about this. Like when it was just me, I didn't really care that much. But when I had like a wife and kids, that's when I really kicked myself in the high
that's
gear.
when it clicked for me. Yeah, but the funny thing is, I'm actually more sad about the loss of the incels genetically or evolutionarily than I am the loss of the uppity middle-aged women, because the thing is, the uppity middle-aged women had all the potential to choose at any point in their lives to not be where they are, and therefore their consequences are entirely the results of their own choices. Whereas the great unwashed mass of the incels, very often, a lot of them do, a lot of them are decent people. They're just not, for lack of a better word, marketable people. They're just not. They just don't hit the valid marker in terms of the dating scene. But they actually have a lot to contribute to society otherwise. I mean, look at how successful OnlyFans women are. Most of that money is coming from incels, which says to me that incels in general are at least high achieving enough to sustain however much money they send to the OnlyFans women.
Yeah, and it might not be like a lot of money for the OnlyFans servers, but the thing is, there are just so many of them.
Wait, with that, and there are so many OnlyFans women that are millionaires because of maybe 1,000 men that have gone down to each of them, which means that roughly, again, I'm pulling numbers out of my ass a little bit, but let's say a OnlyFans model can become a millionaire off of the backs of 1,000 devoted men. That means that those 1,000 devoted men have each devoted, I can't figure out whether it's $1,000 each or $10,000 each. I think it would be $10,000 each. But regardless, they've each devoted enough money that if she was with any one of them, she would be in the middle class. But because she's not with any of them, she is now in the upper middle to upper class. Period. I.e., there is no way this woman will ever be poor unless she is incredibly shitty with her money.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about some of my personal life. It's my uncle. Well, actually, he's my great uncle. But the thing is, he and my aunt got married. Um, they were together until my aunt unfortunately passed away. They had kids and they lived their lives together. Blah 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 blah. My uncle is a great man and well respected within the sphere of our community. He didn't
Mm-hmm.
start out that way. He and my aunt, grew together over time to the point where he could become this great man.
Mm-hmm.
And like a lot of that growing together is, you know, being ignored nowadays because women want guys who have already won. They
Yeah,
don't want to have to be the ones who give the support to men to be able to grow and push them to become great. They want guys who are already great of their own accord.
they want somebody who's already the Giga Chad. And if here's the funny thing, and again, this goes back to the hatred for pickup artists as well. If a quote unquote subpar man does change himself solely to get in good with women, if your Roosh V's, your various other pickup artists go to the gym specifically to look good for women, the women will actually respond to this with feeling tricked, because in their minds, there's this implicit thing of it's not acceptable for an invalid person to become valid. Only the men who are already genetically gifted should become stronger, i.e., only the people who are like 6 foot plus already should bother getting bigger. If the lesser men try to get big or try to become meritocratic in some other way, it's a trick of some kind.
Yeah. And, you know, I've seen, you know, guys who, maybe don't necessarily have money, but they can dress well enough and they're good at speaking, so like they're able
Ahem.
to attract women. But women get upset when they find out, oh, he doesn't actually have as much money as I thought he did, based on the way he spoke and the way he
He
dressed.
carries himself like an aristocrat. Why does he have the resources of an aristocrat? Derp. And again, I want to say for the record, uh, I may be gay, but ahem, yo, that sort of perfectly describes me because my not to toot my own horn here, but I do wear bow ties every single day, and I do have a fairly erudite way of speaking. Again, not trying to toot my own horn here, but I am a good example of this very same phenomena. And there are such things as incels within the gay community as well. To be fair, there are definitely those because a lot of gay men are extremely type A bitches, and there is, I think, something equivalent to hypergamy in the gay community because a lot of gay men are very feminine minded. Um, but that being said, I don't think it's enough of it's not representative of enough of a swath of the gay community to be as statistically noticeable as it is in heterosexual relationships. Although, if we ever do a duality of men and homosexuality, we might talk on the concept of the gay incel because
Should
they
we
do
save that
exist.
for June?
Hmm?
Should we save that for June?
Yeah, probably. When
Okay.
when is Pride Day within June? Because I know June is Pride Month, but I also know there's a Pride Day or something.
I don't know when the day is, but another thing I want to talk about is that for some reason society wants these guys to have no hope. They want them to be miserable forever. They want them to wallow in despair and
You've been
never see
deemed
the light at the end
invalid.
of the
Stop
tunnel.
wasting everyone's time. Basically, is the rule.
Yeah, because all right, I'm sure everybody's seen it by now. The Jordan Peterson interview with Pierce Morgan, where
Oh
he
God.
talks about uh, being cast as the villain in the new movie from, I believe it's Olivia Wilde, and how he's supposed to be the king of the incels. And Jordan Peterson said, sure, like, why not? I mean, Jordan Peterson isn't telling these guys what they want to hear. He's telling these guys how to be better men and better people. And that itself is what is making them feel better about themselves and giving them hope. But
Well,
it's
that
like,
also, and I dislike the assumption that incels even want to be enabled because, as we pointed out earlier, a lot of them, a lot of them aren't the entitled stereotype that, in fact, I would go so far as to say the vast majority of them aren't the straw man that the media paints of them. They actually do want to figure out how do how do I, you know, how do I improve myself? And as
yeah,
Jordan
help.
Peterson has said many times, he finds it odd that he is the personality that these men glom onto because these men have never heard a truly encouraging word in their entire goddamn lives, basically.
Yeah, and it's like he's telling them to like clean your room, like get your shit together, get your life in order before you become concerned about the outside world and attracting
Mm-hmm.
like a woman. Like make sure that you are who you need to be.
And I mean, don't get me wrong. I think Jordan Peterson has issues. I don't wholeheartedly agree with everything Jordan Peterson said. I don't. he's not a perfect stand-in for what these men need, I don't think. But
Well,
in
there's
the
never going to be
abs
a perfect stand-in.
yeah, but in the absence of a better option, we have to play the ball where it lies, and the ball where it lies is Jordan Peterson does his best to be what these men need, and in the process, he gets treated like the king of the incels, a stand-in for Arthur Fleck, Joaquin Phoenix Joker, or um, probably most hilariously, he gets treated as the goddamn Red Skull in Marvel fucking comics because that is the world in
And
which it currently finds itself.
that was the strangest thing, and entirely undeserved.
Hi,
I
lobster.
mean, the man is one of the most respected, movies, a social psychologist in the world. Like he was cited numerous times. I think he
Yeah,
was the most cited social psychologist in the world.
he's probably also the most prominent um disciple or steward of Jungian psychology in particular, because he takes a lot. He doesn't take directly one to one from Jung, but most of his psychological background, and I think he's admitted to this several times, has its roots and has its debts to the work of Carl Gustav Jung. Um, which is in and of itself interesting, and one of the things I take issue with Jordan Peterson on, because I don't think swapping Frankfurt School deconstructionalism with Jungian archetypalism really solves much of anything, but that's neither here nor there.
I think one of the most ridiculous things is that like it's the ones who have no hope, the ones who don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, who go out and do those disastrous, uh, abominable things like shooting people. It's the
I
ones
mean,
who don't have
I mean
somebody to give them
that
hope who do those things.
that's one of the reasons why Joker resonated with people so much, because and to a lesser extent why I think the Killing Joke may have resonated with people as much as it did, because the idea of, to quote the comic, one bad day, that's how far the world is from where I am. And it's not just as simple as one bad day, mind you. Very often it's someone who has had a continuous, lifelong series of bad days, and then the worst of those bad days is what finally breaks the camel's back. And that's what we saw in um, The Killing Joke, and then later adapted excellently in Todd Phillips and Joaquin Phoenix Joker. Um, but it's not because uh we glorify the violence that these types of people do, but because we can understand how we got there. The old phrase, the old version of this one bad day rule used to be called "there but for the grace of God go I," which is to say, you know, I you might look down on this person, but until you've tread where they tread, until you've walked where they walk, until you've gone through what they've gone through, you know, if circumstances were such that you were there and they were here, would there really be that much of a difference?
Yeah, or maybe you've been through something similar that they have, but there was something in your life that kept you from going the edge, like a family member or something.
Yeah,
And they didn't have that in their life, so
yeah,
they ended up
that's
stopping
what
over the edge.
that's the other thing is Arthur Fleck, the Joker, is the worst case scenario for this. It's not an aspirational thing. It's a, again, there but for the grace of God go I. If it weren't for my mentors, if it weren't for my family, if it weren't for my support systems, if it weren't for that things were just a little bit better than that circumstance, I would be sitting there. And it also baffles me how people um view um Elliot Rodger. I remember when Elliot Rodger did what he did, which was terrible, by the way.
So
Um,
do I. And it happened on my birthday.
oh well, fuck me running. That's just, yee. But nevertheless, um, there were so many articles of like, oh, uh, Elliot Rodger, a hero for men's rights, da 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 da. And it's like, okay, no, guys, just because he was a misanthrope, i.e., hated everyone, doesn't mean that he's particularly a misogynist. Because here's the thing: he killed 4 men, 2 women, and himself. That is a double ratio of men to women. And the reason being, and there's actually YouTube videos of him explaining his thought process and why he does things. And it's kind of fascinating. And I'm gonna crib from Dr. Rand McKim again because he did one of the best response videos to Elliot Rodger I've ever seen. The thing with Elliot Rodger is he hates women for not picking him, but he doesn't even begin to care what men think. And it's sad, but in order to hate something, you first have to care about it. One of the reasons why he didn't have anti-male screeds very often was simply because he didn't consider other men to be valid. The only way he viewed men as either something that was in his way or something that he could replace. Very often in his vlogs, you would hear him say things like, "Why is she with this guy and not with an excellent guy like me?" Because he was a classic textbook case of narcissistic personality disorder, by the way. But here's the
Yes,
other thing.
he referred to himself as the ultimate gentleman, which only a
Yeah,
narcissist would do.
yeah, the supreme gentleman. But here's the other thing about narcissistic personality disorder and other cluster B personality disorders. As far as we can tell within the current research, narcissism and other cluster B personality disorders, there is a genetic component to your susceptibility to them, but 99.9 times out of 100, cluster B personality disorders are a trauma response for abuse victims, particularly early in life. I.e., if your brain and your sense of empathy gets you nowhere and it breaks so bad that you basically have to view yourself as the center of the universe, or you would feel like nothing at all. That's when narcissism, borderline personality disorder, and other cluster B personality disorders occur, according to what we know of the available evidence. It's a trauma response, which leads me to the question of what happened to Elliot Rodger that made him this way, and how similar do you suppose it was to the events depicted in something like Joker? And this is also true with other famous examples of this. For example, Anders Behring Breivik was horribly abused by his mother. There's an excellent video by the YouTuber Karen Strawn that goes into this, but she basically went from um, idealizing him to telling him he was the scum of the earth and should never have been born at the drop of a hat. And she also heavily
Was he bipolar?
sexualized either that or histrionic personality disorder or borderline personality disorder. We don't fully know, but that being said, she also heavily sexualized and parentified him to the point where he would often have to um, pick up after her if she went on a drug bender, and she would often make him sleep in the same bed with her when he was a child. But instead of addressing the state of affairs that led to Anders Breivik being Anders Breivik, we blame Anders Breivik, and almost nobody talks about his abusive childhood or the way his mother fucked him up, or the fact that she kept his father away from him, even though his father was, by all accounts, far more psychologically stable than she was.
Like, there were times whenever I crawled into my parents' bed, but that was usually like a nightmare
Yeah,
scenario.
it was for safety. I remember when I was a kid, I often when I would stay with my grandma, I would sleep in the same bed with her, but there was nothing awkward about it at all. It was just, you know, me being a kid kind of thing.
Yeah. And it's really a shame because like we mentioned before, like a lot of these terrible things, like I'm not saying that any woman had to like be in a relationship with someone like Elliot Rodger, obviously, but I feel like
If someone had showed him compassion.
yeah, like if she someone at the very least had just looked at him.
He also didn't have any male friends in particular either, and that's the other thing. Um, it doesn't have to be romantic attention that these people get that keeps them off the ledge. It can be as simple as a little bit of empathy from anyone else.
Yeah, and there is one last story that I want to bring up, and it was I forget where I saw it, but it was a video of this woman who was talking about a male friend of hers, about how he was moving to New York, and he's talking about all these great qualities that he had. Um, like, I think he was a doctor. I think he did all this like really awesome stuff, and she was just talking about how much she liked him, about how great he's going to do in New York, and about how somebody should date, how some woman should find this guy and go out with him. And
So
somebody in the
somebody
comments,
should. I'm not
uh,
going to though.
yeah, that's the thing. Somebody in the comments asked it like, you like this guy and he appears to check all the boxes, like as you
Why
mentioned,
then you?
why aren't you going out with him? And then she replied, like, I've known him since childhood. I can't do that. And I'm like, this is exactly the problem. You want a guy exactly like this, but you
And
have
you've known
already
him since
pre-removed him
childhood, so you have a
from,
social bond with him already.
yeah, you want someone exactly like him, but you have already pre-selected him out of the dating pool. So you want someone like him, just not him.
Even though you have an established connection to him and a personal connection, and you're friends already, and you've known each other for years, and like this relationship is virtually gift wrapped for you, and you're just like, I don't want it. It's
In any other time period, they would already be dating.
yeah, they would he would have courted her, she would have said yes, they would have had any number of children. She would have, grown fat as the wife of a doctor or been a doctor in her own right, because that is something that frequently happens, especially with high achieving husbands. Women could then proceed to pursue their career and get quite a lot of prestige in their own right. And that's not just a modern phenomena. Um, but point being, this should have been obvious. Another case where that happened, um, I was watching. I occasionally watch the channel Base Fizz or Bass Fizz, um, and there was this video. I think it was like a Fresh and Fit type video. I'm not sure if it was actually a Fresh and Fit video or if it was just something similar. But there were these women who were like basically doing the online equivalent of speed dating with these guys. And they would call them in, and then whenever they would get bored with them or whenever the conversation would hit a lull, they would disconnect, and then they would decide which of the guys they wanted to date. And there was this guy who uh who he was 27. He was a PhD student. He had lots of job experience. He was working on getting his MD and so on and so forth. And he had all these hobbies and so on. Like he was telling her all this stuff in this kind of opening salvo conversation, and she nixed him. But then she, this guy called in who was a trucker and a rapper and a gangster, and I swear to you, he mumbled everything he said, and I can't remember him actually speaking in a coherent sentence. And she just immediately glommed onto him. The and she ended up dating him. But the interesting thing was, after this round of speed dating, she goes and tries to explain why she 86 the first guy, and her main response was, he didn't really tell me much about himself. And I'm sitting there going, bitch, he basically gave you an entire goddamn resume of his job prospects, his interests, his hobbies, and his the short version of his life story. That's a hell of a lot to be gifted with in the first conversation with somebody. And you decided to go with the guy who's like a gangster and a rapper who couldn't string together a coherent sentence. And in your mind, he told you more about himself than the other guy did. And I'm just sitting there like, even by like hypergamy rules, the first guy is still better because he actually has job prospects, interests, intellectual, all these things that are supposed to be like pro hypergamy things. And all the other guy had, according to her, that made her eventually say yes to him was swag. And my brain just almost exploded because I'm like, you know what's going to happen is she's going to go out with the guy with the swag, and then as soon as the spicy, dangerous swag vibe wears off, she's gonna get bored with him and wonder why didn't I date someone with job prospects and interests and the ability to have conversations with me? And then she's gonna wonder why she didn't go for the next guy, or she's never gonna remember the first guy again. She's just going to constantly describe her perfect guy as exactly the guy that she just had on a just had on a hook and said no to. It frustrated me beyond all reason.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, could you really even see it's hypergamy? Because the other guy, the first guy, demonstrated that he would be a better prospect in terms of um, career and resources. So
Yeah, and the ability to pay attention to her, and the ability to have good conversations with, and so on and so on. And I had that same mode of like, even thinking in terms of like female hypergamy, you done fucked up here. But it is worth noting that never forget that the rules for hypergamy that we come up with as a species were established in the goddamn Stone Age. I think what it was is the second guy had a more Cro-Magnon dominant vibe, whereas the first guy came off as a little bit mousier and a little bit more introverted. And she essentially was led around by her cave woman instincts rather than. And yes, this woman was black. No, that's not a racial thing I just said. I was referring to the fact, again, that we established these rules in the Stone Age. And I think what it is her brain is more wired for the Stone Age rules than the softer, more nuanced sort of Renaissance era rules that came on later. Even though consciously, I think here's the thing: I don't even think she knows what she did wrong there. I think consciously she thinks she. I think consciously she convinced herself that the first guy wasn't saying anything of substance, and that the second guy somehow managed to say things more substantively, even though he couldn't string together a coherent sentence. But in actuality, what I think it was is the second guy came off as mousy and introverted, and the first guy, or yeah, the first guy came off as mousy and introverted, and the second guy came off as having a lot of machismo, despite the fact that he couldn't coherently swing a sentence together, and that's why she pointed out the swag of the second guy.
yeah, that reminds me of this one video where I believe it was like a Zoom call, but this guy was basically presenting himself to this woman as a potential dating option, and he said, "Yeah, I'm in the Navy. Um, I started a small business, but I sold it, and but I decided to go into the Navy, and I majored in physics, and I'm currently training to be a nuclear physicist engineer for the United States Navy." And the woman passed on him because, in her words, he didn't really tell me that much interesting about
I
himself.
think I think this actually might be the same fucking. I think this might be the same video we're thinking of.
And I'm like, Jesus, if a naval officer, nuclear physicist doesn't stand a chance, the rest of us
He
are
he
screwed.
he he gave you like his resume, his interests, his life story, and also keep in mind this guy's only 27 and on the fast track for advanced career placement. I had the same thought. It was just like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
Like in a sane, healthy dating market, he would be the guy.
Yeah, yeah. No, this should have been. Oh, he should have gotten through like half of what he said, and she should have gone, "You will marry me now," and he would have gone, "Okay." That's the sane version. But instead, no, she goes with the trucker slash rapper slash drug dealer with the swag and the bling. Because because swag totally is going to make the relationship last and isn't going to get old after 2 years. And she's totally not going to be wondering to herself, why didn't I go with someone who has more job prospects and isn't such a goddamn thug? Derp.
That reminds me of do you remember the story about the Tinder swindler?
Yes.
This guy who would make Tinder profiles and basically give off the appearance of a wealthy, affluent lifestyle, and take women on like charted
Basically
trips and stuff.
putting on the show.
Yeah, he put on the show, and he made it seem like he had enemies who were after him to give him that bit of a dangerous edge.
Yeah, the
And then he
edgy
would,
boy cachet.
yeah, and then he would hook up with these women and scam them out of money, and then move on to the next one. And he did this to so many women because they were so blinded by the flash and the veneer that they didn't even look if he had anything
Yeah.
physical under the surface.
Yeah, ooh, status symbol, status symbol. I like status symbol. Yeah. Fucking Stone Age hypergamy for the win, I guess.
Yeah, and then they make this like whole documentary about this guy as if he's some like great monster. I mean, he's a bad guy for scamming people, but mostly you're just an idiot.
Yeah, but aren't we going to talk about the mechanism that let the scam work again as reliably as it did? But no, that would require viewing women as having done something wrong and having women be something other than pure, and we can't have that, derp. Yeah, well.
Yeah,
Anyway, it's
an hour and
been
17 minutes.
yeah.
So, do you have any thoughts about incels and the way our society treats them?
Guys, the short version is a lot of you have a lot of things to offer. They're just not the typical normal things to offer the world. So here's my advice to you. Stop defining yourselves by how women view you and start defining yourselves by what you have to offer yourself and the world. Because a lot of you are extremely financially successful. A lot of you are extremely professionally affluent. A lot of you are creative. A lot of you are artists. A lot of you have plenty of skills that can create things that are more meaningful to the world. So stop defining yourselves by what women want or what you want from women, and start defining yourselves by what value you actually do have. Um stop aching for the value that society won't see in you and start trying to prove them wrong, because that's how you win. If society refuses to acknowledge that you're worthwhile, prove them wrong. That's my advice.
Yeah, and one thing I would suggest is try and choose a skill that interests you and attempt to master it because it'll give you something to focus on other than constantly trying to get the attention of women. And often, if you do hone a skill to the point where you're a master of it, that will attract people to you because they will be impressed by your level of skill.
Yeah, and never mind women. Sometimes it's nice just to have a group of friends. And if that's the best life can offer you, then I would say you made out pretty okay because there are plenty of people, and I'm sure the people we're talking to can understand this. There are plenty of people who just don't have friends, and that in and of itself is a travesty. And here's the other thing I want to point out: Bill Gates and his co-conspirator at Microsoft built the first computer in a garage. Mark Zuckerberg was a college student who had just gotten dumped, as you can see in the movie The Social Network. And by the way, if it weren't for Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg would have been the archetypical incel. But that's exactly my point. The difference between where you are and where Mark Zuckerberg is or was circa 2004 to 2007 is just he believed that his idea was worth it on its own terms, and I'd say he got amply rewarded for that. So
Yeah.
if the only difference between you guys and Silicon Valley billionaires is a really good idea or a really epic skill, then I'd say you have your marching orders, kids. Develop a really good idea or a really awesome skill, and then the incels, just like the nerds of yesteryear, for the term incel basically just has all the negative connotations of the word nerd 20 years ago. The incels of today, like the nerds of yesteryear, are just one brilliant idea or one epic skill away from dominating the entire field.
But please do the world a favor and stop before you become evil.
Yeah, yeah, attempts to make it there without being a Machiavellian supervillain. Because here's the thing: I think incels, a lot of them, have enough empathy that if they got the great idea or the epic skill, they would actually use the wealth of someone like Zuckerberg or Bezos or um, Gates for the bettering of society instead of aristocratic posturing and moralistic hysteria. And of course, Machiavellian evil.
Everybody, I've been Mystery.
And I've been Dalton Mortimer, the Authenticator. We've been the Duality of Man. Cheers, guys.
Bye, everybody.